The winter of 1945 cast a bitter shadow across the German landscape. Snow had turned to slush, and slush had frozen into treacherous ice that clung to everything: tanks, rifles, and the boots of soldiers who had marched farther than they ever thought possible. Among those soldiers were men whose stories America had tried to forget. Men who fought two wars simultaneously, one against fascism abroad and another against racism at home. They were the 761st Tank Battalion, the Black Panthers, along with infantry units from the 92nd Infantry Division, African. American soldiers who had been told their entire lives what they couldn't do, where they couldn't go, and what they would never achieve. Before them stood Coburg, a medieval German city crowned with an ancient fortress that loomed over the surrounding valleys like a sentinel from another time. The city wasn't just another dot on a map. It was a symbol, a place the SS had declared American tanks will never touch. The Nazis had fortified every approach, mined every road, and positioned snipers in the Gothic spires of churches whose bells had rung for centuries. Hitler himself had visited Coburg 15 times. It was where the Nazi movement had gained early momentum, a city steeped in German nationalist history and pride. "They say we can't take it," said Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, his voice barely audible over the rumble of Sherman tank engines warming up in the pre-dawn darkness. "They've been saying what we can't do since we got to Europe." The scars on his face, earned in previous battles, seemed to deepen in the shadows. "Today we show them what we can do." The men of the 761st had already proven themselves across France and Belgium, fighting through the Battle of the Bulge when other units faltered. They had liberated towns, crushed German defenses, and saved countless Allied lives, but their accomplishments were rarely mentioned in dispatches. Their valor was an inconvenient truth for an army that still seated them in segregated mess halls and assigned them to all black units led mostly by white officers who often resented their command. The official mission briefing had come down the night before: take Coburg, secure its strategic railway junction, cut off the German retreat. But for these men it was more than a military objective. It was a chance to prove what should never have needed proving in the first place: that courage had no color, that patriotism knew no prejudice. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Bates, the white commander who had fought to keep his black tankers together when the army wanted to break them up for service duties, gathered his officers in a bombed-out farmhouse. Maps were spread across a table made from ammunition crates. Coffee steamed in metal cups clutched by hands chapped from the cold. "Intelligence reports heavy resistance," Bates said, his finger tracing the routes into the city. "Anti-tank guns here, here, and here. Machine gun nests covering all approaches. They've had months to prepare. They think Coburg is untouchable." He paused, looking at the faces around him, black men who had consistently exceeded every low expectation set for them. "We're going to touch it, gentlemen. We're going to do more than touch it. We're going to take it." Among those listening was First Lieutenant Charles Thomas, whose leadership had already earned him a Distinguished Service Cross. Though many believed he deserved the Medal of Honor, an award no black soldier had received since the Spanish-American War, Thomas studied the map intently, calculating angles of approach, mentally preparing for what they would face. "They'll expect us to wait for better weather," he said, "so we go now." Through the worst of it, dawn broke gray and unforgiving as the first Shermans of the 761st rumbled forward. Behind them came trucks carrying soldiers from the 92nd Infantry Division, the Buffalo Soldiers, named after black cavalrymen of the frontier wars. Many had been pulled from service units, men originally deemed only fit to drive trucks or work in kitchens, now repurposed as combat infantry when casualties mounted and the desperate need for fighting men overcame ingrained prejudice. Private First Class William Perry had been a cook just 3 months earlier. Now he clutched an M1 Garand rifle, trying to steady his breathing as the truck bounced along cratered roads. "My mama didn't raise no hero," he whispered to the man beside him, a former postal worker from Detroit. "She just raised a man who does what needs doing." The man nodded, understanding in his eyes. They'd all taken similar journeys from the segregated South, from northern ghettos, from places where they couldn't vote to a foreign land where they were expected to die for democracy. The first resistance came 3 miles from Coburg's medieval center. German 88mm guns opened fire from concealed positions, their shells screaming overhead before slamming into the frozen earth, sending deadly shards of soil and ice in all directions. 2 Shermans were hit almost immediately, their hulls breached, flames erupting from their hatches. In the lead tank, Sergeant Warren Cressy, already known as the baddest man in the 761st, for his fearless actions in previous engagements, ordered his driver to accelerate directly toward the German position. His tank, nicknamed Cressy's Charge, lurched forward, treads churning through the mud as German shells landed all around them. "Gunner, a P-round 2 o'clock stone building with the red roof," Cressy ordered. his voice eerily calm in the chaos. The 75mm gun on the Sherman roared in response, the shell finding its mark with deadly precision. The German gun position erupted in a cloud of dust and debris, but for every enemy position they neutralized, another seemed to appear. The city's medieval layout provided perfect defensive terrain, narrow streets, thick stone buildings, elevated positions with clear fields of fire. By midday, the advance had stalled at the outskirts of Coburg proper. 3 more tanks had been hit. Dozens of infantry lay wounded or dead in the blood-stained snow. Captain Ivan Harrison, commanding one of the infantry companies, sought cover behind a partially collapsed wall. Bullets snapped overhead so close he could feel their passage disturb the air. Beside him, his radio man tried repeatedly to call for artillery support, but either the messages weren't getting through or the requests were being ignored. Common experience for black units who often found themselves lowest on the priority list for support. "We do this ourselves, then," Harrison muttered, checking the ammunition in his Thompson submachine gun. He had been a history teacher in civilian life, specializing in European medieval history. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now fighting in a German city whose castle dated back to the 13th century. A black man leading black soldiers to liberate part of a culture that had built its new identity on racial purity. Harrison gathered a squad of 12 men. Their plan was simple and desperate. While the tanks drew fire from the main German positions, they would infiltrate through the sewers and emerge behind enemy lines. It was the kind of high-risk mission that black units were often assigned, though rarely recognized for completing successfully. "They say we're not smart enough for complex operations," Harrison told his men as they prepared to descend into the darkness beneath the city. "Let's prove them wrong one more time." The sewers were frigid, filled with icy water that rose to their knees in places. They moved in silence, guided only by a crude map Harrison had sketched based on pre-war civil engineering documents found in a captured German headquarters days earlier. The darkness was almost total, broken only by the occasional shaft of light from drainage grates overhead. Meanwhile, above ground, the battle intensified. The Sherman tanks of the 761st had formed a semicircle at the city's edge, their guns hammering German positions while taking heavy fire in return. Inside his tank, Lieutenant Charles Thomas coordinated the attack, maintaining a calm, measured voice over the radio that belied the intensity of the situation. Panther 2 o'clock called his gunner as a German tank appeared from behind a bombed-out church. "I see it," Thomas replied. "All units concentrate fire, building with the steeple." 3 Shermans fired almost simultaneously, their shells converging on the German position. The Panther, with its superior armor and gun, might have been more than a match for a single Sherman, but it couldn't withstand the coordinated firepower of multiple tanks. After the 3rd hit, it erupted in flames, its ammunition cooking off in a series of secondary explosions that collapsed part of the church wall onto it. But the victory was momentary. German infantry armed with Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons were moving through the buildings, using the medieval warren of streets to approach the American tanks from the flanks and rear where their armor was thinnest. Sergeant Reuben Rivers spotted the threat first. Despite a severe leg wound suffered days earlier that would have sent most men to the field hospital, Rivers had refused evacuation. Now he ordered his driver to reposition, turning to face the approaching threat. "Reverse, reverse," he shouted as he saw the German soldier raise the Panzerfaust to his shoulder. The tank lurched backward, but not fast enough. The anti-tank rocket struck just below the turret, penetrating the armor. The interior of the Sherman instantly became an inferno. 2 crewmen managed to escape the burning vehicle. Rivers was not among them. As the battle raged above, Captain Harrison and his squad emerged from the sewers behind the main German defensive line. They found themselves in what had once been a market square, now transformed into a supply and command area for the defending forces. German soldiers moved about with the confidence of men who believed the fighting was still far from their position. Harrison gave hand signals to his men, directing them to take covered positions around the square. Then, on his signal, they opened fire. The surprise was total. Dozens of German soldiers fell in the initial volley, others scrambling for weapons or cover as the unexpected attack shattered their sense of security. In the confusion, Harrison led a smaller team directly toward a building where officers could be seen shouting orders and attempting to organize a response. They breached the door with a captured Panzerfaust, the blast killing the guards inside and stunning everyone else in the building. "This is for Reuben Rivers," Harrison said as he entered, his Thompson submachine gun at the ready. "This is for every black soldier you thought couldn't fight." The German command center was secured within minutes. Harrison's men quickly established defensive positions, using the captured German weapons and ammunition to supplement their own dwindling supplies. Then Harrison did something that would later be described as either brilliant or reckless. He used the Germans' own communication system to broadcast false orders to their remaining forces. Having studied German at university before the war, Harrison was able to convince the defenders at several key positions to withdraw, claiming they were being encircled and needed to fall back to secondary positions. The resulting confusion, combined with the continued frontal assault from the tanks and main infantry force, created gaps in the German defenses. Outside the city, Lieutenant Colonel Bates received word of Harrison's success. "Push now," he ordered. "Everything we've got." They're breaking. The remaining tanks of the 761st surged forward, infantry of the 92nd Division moving alongside them. They encountered pockets of fierce resistance, but the coordinated defense had fractured. Street by street, building by building, they fought their way toward the center of Coburg. Private William Perry, the former cook, found himself leading a small group of soldiers after their sergeant was killed by sniper fire. They were tasked with clearing buildings along one of the main approaches to the castle that dominated the city. Room by room, Perry instructed, his voice steadier than he felt. "Watch the corners, watch for booby traps." In one house, they found a German family huddled in the basement, an elderly man, a woman, and 3 children. The woman clutched the children to her, fear evident in her eyes as the black soldiers entered their hiding place. The propaganda about African-American troops had been particularly vicious, with Nazi leaflets describing them as savages who would murder civilians without hesitation. Perry saw the terror in their faces and did something that surprised even himself. He unwrapped a chocolate bar from his ration kit and broke it into pieces, offering them to the children. Then, in broken German he'd picked up over months of fighting, he told them, "We are not here to hurt you." The gesture, small as it was, seemed to pierce something in the moment, a recognition of shared humanity amid the insanity of war. As Perry and his squad moved on to the next building, the elderly German man nodded to him in a gesture that needed no translation. Respect. By late afternoon, American forces had secured nearly 70% of the city. The German defenders were falling back to the castle itself, their last stronghold. The medieval fortress, with walls several feet thick in places, presented a formidable final obstacle. A frontal assault would cost hundreds of lives. Lieutenant Charles Thomas, his tank now positioned in what had once been the city's main square, studied the castle through binoculars. Despite multiple near misses, his Sherman had survived the day's fighting, though its armor was scarred and dented from shrapnel and small arms fire. "We can't just hammer it with shells," he said to Colonel Bates, who had moved forward to assess the situation personally. "Those walls are too strong and we don't have enough ammunition left." Bates nodded grimly. They had already lost nearly a third of their tanks and almost 100 infantrymen. Taking the castle by direct assault might double those casualties. "What about Harrison?" Bates asked. "Any word?" As if in answer, the radio crackled to life. Harrison's voice, strained but clear. "We're inside the castle walls." "Repeat." "We're inside the castle." The sewer tunnels that had allowed Harrison and his men to bypass the German front. Lines had one final branch, an ancient drainage system that led directly into the castle's lower levels. It had been sealed with a modern steel grate, but decades of dampness had weakened the surrounding mortar, allowing them to create an opening just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Harrison's squad, now reduced to 7 men after the earlier fighting, had infiltrated the castle from below, emerging in what appeared to be medieval dungeons that had been converted to storerooms. They moved silently through the ancient corridors, eliminating German sentries with knives and silenced pistols before they could raise the alarm. "We've reached what looks like a command center," Harrison reported. "At least 30 enemy officers and staff. We can't take them all, but we can cause chaos if you create a diversion." Bates turned to Thomas. "Light up the front gate. Everything we've got. Make them think we're coming through the front door." Thomas relayed the orders. Within minutes, every remaining tank and artillery piece was firing at the castle's main entrance. The barrage was more sound and fury than effective fire few. Shells could actually damage the ancient stonework, but it had the desired effect. The defenders rushed to repel what they believed was the main attack, leaving Harrison's position with reduced opposition. Now Harrison whispered to his men as the German officers began shouting orders, directing forces toward the front gate. His squad burst from cover, weapons at the ready. "Hands up," Harrison commanded in German. "The city has fallen. You are surrounded." There was a moment of stunned silence. A senior SS officer reached for his pistol, but before he could draw it, one of Harrison's men shot him through the chest. The remaining Germans, seeing the determination in the faces of the black American soldiers who had somehow materialized in their supposedly impregnable headquarters, began slowly raising their hands. Harrison keyed his radio again. "We have their command." "Repeat, we have secured the German command. They're surrendering." Outside, white flags began appearing along the castle walls. The defenders, learning that their leadership had been captured and that black American soldiers, the very men Nazi propaganda had dismissed as subhuman, were already inside there. untouchable fortress began laying down their arms. As night fell over Coburg, the city that the SS had sworn would never be taken by American tanks was firmly in American hands. The cost had been high: 17 tanks destroyed or damaged beyond repair, 157 infantrymen killed or wounded. Among the dead was Sergeant Reuben Rivers, whose self-sacrifice had saved his crew and blocked a German counterattack at a critical moment. In the castle courtyard, now illuminated by spotlights mounted on Sherman tanks, Lieutenant Colonel Bates gathered the surviving officers and senior non-commissioned officers of the 761st and the 92nd. Many were wounded, all were exhausted beyond measure. Their uniforms were caked with mud, blood, and the grime of battle. "Gentlemen," Bates said, his voice carrying in the cold night air, "today you did what they said couldn't be done. You took a city that was supposed to be untouchable." He paused, looking at each face in turn. "History may not remember what you did here. The newspapers back home may never print your names, but I will remember. And someday the world will know the truth about what happened here." Single quotes Captain Harrison. His face streaked with sewer filth and gunpowder residue, stepped forward. "Permission to address the men, sir." Bates nodded. Harrison turned to his fellow soldiers. "My grandmother was born a slave in Mississippi. She told me stories of being treated as less than human. Today we prove that we are not only fully human, we are extraordinary." His voice cracked with emotion. "Each of you is a living refutation of every lie they've told about us, every door they've closed in our faces, every time they said we weren't good enough." The men stood a little straighter, pride momentarily overcoming exhaustion. Among them was Private William Perry, the former cook whose actions in clearing buildings had saved dozens of lives. "What happens now, sir?" he asked Harrison. The captain looked toward the east, where they knew more battles awaited them as they pushed deeper into Nazi Germany. "Now we keep going. We keep proving them wrong, day after day, battle after battle, and maybe, just maybe, when we go home, things will be different." It was a hope that would prove both fulfilled and betrayed in the years to come. When the 761st Tank Battalion and the 92nd Infantry Division returned to America, they came home to a nation that had not yet decided if it was ready to recognize their sacrifice and valor. Many of their achievements, including the taking of Coburg, were minimized or omitted from official histories. Medals were denied or delayed for decades. The black press celebrated them as heroes, but mainstream America largely ignored their contributions. It would take more than 50 years before Sergeant Reuben Rivers was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor in 1997. The nation finally acknowledging what his fellow soldiers had known all along, that his courage had been of the highest order. Lieutenant Charles Thomas would also eventually receive the Medal of Honor decades after his death. Captain Ivan Harrison's innovative tactics would be studied in military academies, though often without mentioning that the officer who devised them was black. For the men who fought that day, the victory at Coburg was both triumph and tragedy, proof of what they could achieve when given the chance, and a painful reminder of how much harder they had to fight for recognition. The city that the SS had declared untouchable had fallen to the very men that America itself had often treated as untouchable, segregated, marginalized, their potential dismissed. As the years passed and memories faded, the story of Coburg's fall might have been lost entirely if not for the efforts of historians and the aging veterans themselves, who insisted on telling their stories before they were gone. Their testimonies, collected in oral histories and memoirs, preserved the truth of what happened when black American soldiers proved that courage knows no color. The tanks of the 761st would go on to spearhead the capture of 30 more towns and villages before the war's end. They would liberate more than 30,000 prisoners from Nazi concentration camps, coming face to face with horrors that resonated especially deeply with men who understood systematic oppression firsthand. The soldiers of the 92nd would continue fighting their way through northern Italy, taking heavy casualties but never faltering in their duty. In the end, they had done more than take a city. They had written a chapter of American history in their own blood, a chapter that demanded to be remembered, not as a footnote, but as a testament to what is possible when courage overcomes prejudice, when determination defies expectation, and when men fight for a freedom they themselves had not yet fully been granted. The dawn after Coburg's fall brought weak sunlight filtering through clouds over a city forever changed. German civilians emerged cautiously from cellars and shelters to find black American soldiers distributing rations, treating the wounded, and maintaining order with a discipline and humanity that defied every vile stereotype the Nazi propaganda machine had fed them. In the shattered main square, a Sherman tank crew worked to repair a damaged track. Their commander, a sergeant who had taken over after Lieutenant Thomas was finally evacuated for wounds he had ignored for hours, paused as an elderly German woman approached hesitantly. She carried something in her arms, a loaf of bread still warm from an oven somehow functional amidst the destruction. She offered it to him with trembling hands. He accepted with a nod of thanks, then broke it into pieces to share with his crew and nearby. German children, watching wide-eyed as these men whom they had been told were devils, revealed themselves to be merely men, tired and hungry like everyone else. It was a small moment, unrecorded in any official dispatch. Yet in that simple act of shared humanity lay the true victory of Coburg, not just the taking of a strategic objective, but the dismantling of a lie, the refutation of hatred through the simple, powerful evidence of common decency. If this story moved you, please take a second to like this video. It truly helps us keep these untold stories alive. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to discover more real stories of Black heroes whose courage changed the course of history.